There are already 3,022 submissions, so this will probably get buried. But here is a true story. In the late 70s, my uncle was studying medicine at the University of Chicago. After a morning class, he decided that he would hitchhike back home to Lincoln Park on the north side instead of pay for a taxi. A man drove up in a Plymouth Satellite and offered my uncle a ride. The man looked normal and seemed friendly, lighthearted even, so my uncle got in the car and they started driving towards Lakeshore Drive. However, once they got there, the man drove south on Lakeshore instead of north, towards Lincoln Park. My uncle told the man he was going the wrong way and to turn around and head north. The man looked at my uncle, put his hand on his knee and said, "No, son, you are coming with me," and smiled darkly at him. My uncle froze in panic, and when they hit traffic near the South Shore, he quickly unlocked the passenger door and ran away without looking back. A year or two later, on a cold December day, my uncle was having coffee in a cafe with my future aunt when he caught something on the TV that made his blood run cold. He saw the man that had picked him up from school that day the year before. He had been arrested for the suspected rape and killing of over 20 young men and boys. The man on the television was John Wayne Gacy, and he had removed the door handle off the passenger side door to prevent the men he picked up from escaping. My 4-year-old daughter was supposedly asleep when I heard noise coming from her upstairs bedroom. I tried to listen but could not make out what was being said. I approached the room and she stopped talking. Thinking I alarmed her, I went into the room. At the same time, she was sharing it with her 3-year-old sister. I walked in and saw the 4-year-old sitting up in bed. I smiled and said, "Is everything okay?" She said fine, but her sister said they were keeping her up. I asked who? My 4-year-old said sorry, but that she was talking. When I asked her who she was talking to, my 3-year-old sat up and said, "The girl in the window. She said you were coming." After I shit a brick, I asked who the girl was, and they both said a girl comes and stands in front of the window at night and talks to them. Not knowing what to say, I said okay, tucked them in, and hung around outside their door. The next day, I asked about the girl. They said she came back but was mad. I waited a few days and asked again. My 4-year-old said the girl in the window was still mad. I forgot about it for a week. When my wife said, "Who are the girls talking to upstairs?" Freaked out, I ran upstairs and both girls were sitting under the window looking up. They turned and looked at me and said if I wanted to meet the girl. When they turned around, disappointed, they said the girl left. It had been about 5 years since, and I have not heard about the girl in the window since then. I did not write this, but it's easily the best I've ever read. There was a hunter in the woods who, after a long day hunting, was in the middle of an immense forest. It was getting dark, and having lost his bearings, he decided to head in one direction until he was clear of the increasingly oppressive foliage. After what seemed like hours, he came across a cabin in a small clearing. Realizing how dark it had grown, he decided to see if he could stay there for the night. He approached and found the door ajar. Nothing was inside. The hunter flopped down on the single bed, decided to explain himself to the owner in the morning. As he looked around, he was surprised to see the walls adorned with many portraits, all painted in incredible detail. Without exception, they appeared to be staring down at him, their features twisted into looks of hatred. Staring back, he grew increasingly uncomfortable. Making a concerted effort to ignore the many hateful faces, he turned to face the wall, and exhausted, he fell into a restless sleep. Face down in an unfamiliar bed, he turned blinking in an unexpected light. Looking up, he discovered that the cabin had no portraits, only windows. When I was a child, my family moved to a big, old 2-floor house with big empty rooms and creaking floorboards. Both my parents worked, so I was often alone when I came home from school. One early evening, when I came home, the house was still dark. I called out, "Mom?" And her sing-song voice said, "Yes," from upstairs. I called her again as I climbed the stairs to see which room she was in, and again got the same "Yes" reply. We were decorating at the time, and I didn't know my way around the maze of rooms, but she was in one of the far ones, right down the hall. I felt uneasy, but I figured that was the only natural place, so I rushed forward to see my mom, knowing that her presence would calm my fears, as a mother's presence always does. But as I reached for the handle of the door to let myself into the room, I heard the front door downstairs open, and my mother called, "Sweetie, are you home?" in a cheery voice. I jumped back, startled, and ran down the stairs to her. But as I glanced back from the top of the stairs, the door to the room slowly opened a crack. For a brief moment, I saw something strange in there, and I don't know what it was, but it was staring at me. Not a crime investigator, but Dio Aking went missing about a decade ago and was found in boxes. It is estimated that she was cut up into 2,000 pieces. Where they put her back together, they were missing a heart, spleen, and liver. My personal theory is black market organ transplants. To sell or to use, I don't know. Maybe to sell because the heart sells for around $1 million US on the black market. I once visited a city that was in the middle of a serial killer spree. Young women were being killed and mutilated late at night, their bodies just dumped in the middle of the paths to be found the next morning. No one had any idea who was behind the attacks, not even law enforcement. The city was on the verge of widespread panic. With the help of a few connections in the city's law enforcement, I was allowed to begin looking into the murders alongside the current investigation. We eventually traced the scene of the murderers to an abandoned house in an upper-class section of town. When we broke in, the scene we saw will haunt me forever. Most of the house was pretty dilapidated, but there was one room concealed behind an old wardrobe where the murderer conducted his horrific crimes. There was blood all over the walls and floor, with buckets of it around. The smell was horrible, and there was some sort of altar smeared with blood and some sort of amulet, which I can only guess as its purpose. Safe to say, this was the worst scene I have ever come across in my entire career. I was pretty wrecked after this, and ended up leaving the city without seeing the investigation conclude. The last I heard, though, was that they had actually caught the killer, some guy named Calixto, who owned a museum of sorts in the city, and had been trying to conduct a necromantic ritual. Thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.